I was crushed when the clinic note circled my weight like a guilty verdict. He smirked, saying insurance would never cover someone that far gone. The test proved him wrong. 6 minutes, 462 meters, my breath ragged but enough. She offered me pie as pity, not knowing I'd already thrown one into the bin like a coffin lid shutting. And that was only the beginning. On a gray October afternoon in Maple Ridge, Ohio, the fluorescent lights of the county cardiology clinic hummed with a steady, almost indifferent rhythm. Dr. Nate Holloway adjusted his glasses and set the medical chart squarely on the desk between them. His tone was matter-of-fact, almost detached, but the words struck harder than any scolding. Weight 238 pounds, A1C 8.6. He read each number crisp as though carved in stone. He underlined the figures with his pen, then drew a tight circle around the final note. You'll need to reduce at least 25 pounds, bring your A1C under 7, and complete a 6-minute walk of at least 450 meters. Deadline November 20th, 4 p.m. sharp. He looked up at her with practiced steadiness. If you don't meet those goals, your knee replacement and cardiac clearance will be canceled. Insurance requires it. The words landed like cold stones in Eve Carter's chest. 57 years of steady work in a school cafeteria had taught her how to measure portions, how to stretch food budgets, how to smile even when her feet ached. But nothing had prepared her for the blunt mathematics of survival laid bare on that page. She nodded slowly, as though taking notes for someone else's life, her lips pressed tight to keep from trembling. Dr. Holloway softened his tone only slightly. I'm not saying it's impossible, but the clock is ticking. You've got 5 weeks. Make them count. When she rose from the chair, her knees popped audibly, and she forced herself not to wince. The hallway smelled faintly of antiseptic and lemon polish. Beyond the glass doors, the Ohio wind had turned sharp, scattering brittle orange leaves across cracked sidewalks. She pulled her coat tight around her middle and stepped out the clinic doors, sighing shut behind her. Across the street, neon letters buzzed to life in the gathering dusk. Walt's Maple Diner, open 24 hours. The glow promised warmth, something steadier than the cold numbers still ringing in her ears. She crossed quickly, grateful for the blast of bacon grease and coffee that enveloped her as the bell above the door jingled. Walt himself leaned against the counter, wiping his hands on a striped towel. He had the kind of lined face that came from decades of night shifts, his voice rough, but not unkind. Sliding a laminated menu toward her, he said, "How about a slice of pie on the house, fresh out of the oven?" Eve hesitated, but the habit of politeness won out. "It's for my granddaughter," she replied, summoning a smile. The lie was gentle, almost harmless, but her stomach growled at the thought of sweet crust and filling. She took her usual booth near the window, the vinyl seat patched with duct tape, and waited while Walt boxed up a generous slice. The chatter of truckers at the counter filled the space, punctuated by the hiss of a coffee pot refill. Eve slipped a dollar bill into the tip jar, its glass sides rattling with coins. When the cashier handed over her receipt, the stamp at the bottom carried a cheerful message: "Stay warm." She tucked it into her purse, the paper still warm from the machine, and stepped back into the October air. The box in her hands radiated a gentle heat, as though she carried a secret against the chill. Her little house sat at the end of Maple Street, a modest 2-bedroom with siding that needed paint and a porch light that flickered when the wind blew. She set the pie on the kitchen counter, its sugary aroma filling the quiet. Then, almost against her will, she pulled open the drawer near the stove. Inside lay a small red timer shaped like a cardinal, its wings molded in mid-flap. The plastic bird had not moved in years. For a moment she held it in her palm, its weight both trivial and heavy with memory. Once she had used it to time batches of cookies for school bake sales. Now it sat frozen time itself stalled. She returned it to the drawer, shutting it softly. Standing in the stillness of her kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator, the only witness, she whispered, "I'm fine." The words sounded almost believable, but her voice trembled as she spoke them. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the brittle leaves along the curb. The porch light flickered once more, throwing her shadow long and uncertain across the floor. 2 days later, before Dawn had a chance to push back the night Eve's laptop chimed. The kitchen was still and cool, the half-eaten pie on the counter showing fork marks like tally scratches against resolve. She rubbed sleep from her eyes and clicked the new message. The subject line was crisp and impersonal: reduction in hours, effective immediately. The note itself was shorter than the subject, a few sentences dressed in courtesy due to ongoing physical limitations noted by supervisory staff. Your scheduled hours will be reduced until further review. She read it twice, then a third time, as if repetition might loosen the words. Her hand tightened around the mouse until the knuckles whitened. By 7, she was in the high school cafeteria, hair pulled back, apron tied just so. The morning routine tried to carry her forward, racks of trays to be set out, cartons of milk to stack, the soft thud of plastic against plastic, but the email clung like damp cloth. The clatter of the walk-in cooler door echoed through the prep area. A coworker asked if she'd watched last night's game. Eve nodded without registering the team. She moved carefully a beat behind her usual pace, keeping weight off the knee that pulsed with each step. In the break room, under a bulletin board crowded with stale flyers and a map of the county peppered with pushpins, Tom Weaver waited with a clipboard. He was younger than she was by a decade, the sort of man who believed in forms because forms didn't argue. "Morning, Eve," he said, not unkind, just brisk. "Got your email, I assume." "I did," she answered, sitting slowly. The vinyl chair sighed. Tom glanced at a column on his sheet. "We need staff who can move faster. Breakfast rush is tight and we can't afford delays." He kept his eyes on the page as if eye contact might open a door he didn't want to walk through. "I know you've given a lot to this place. This is temporary." Temporary could stretch. She knew that from other people's stories, from the way until further review could take on the size of a winter. Eve smoothed the edge of her apron and nodded again, the gesture small and practiced. The day pulled itself forward. Lunch trays slid down the line. The chorus of voices rose and fell. A girl with braces shyly asked for extra carrots because Mom says I have to. Eve found herself smiling at that. A true smile, then winced when a sharp flash went through her knee as she turned. The clock over the dish station ticked with a stubborn, even patience she found almost offensive. At quitting time earlier now, because of the email, she drove home under a sky that had turned the color of wet newspaper. Rain began as a fine mist, then thickened into real drops. By the time she reached Maple Street, the gutters were busy, the little rivers that appear in old neighborhoods when the ground can't drink fast enough. She set the pink box of donuts on the passenger seat and glanced at it, surprised at the flicker of gratitude and dread. Maya's car pulled up a minute after Eve parked. Her daughter stepped out hugging a sweater to her cheeks, bright from the cold. "You work so hard, Mom," she said, lifting the box as if it were a prize. "You deserve these." The lid opened to a parade of sugar-glazed chocolate-frosted jelly that threatened to stain anything reckless enough to touch it. Eve forced a smile that felt friendly enough to count. "You shouldn't have," she said. The truth unstated was that she would eat one, maybe two, and hate herself quietly afterward. They made small talk in the doorway, the sort that belongs to kitchens and weather. Maya asked about the surgery date. Eve said November 20th and left it there. She did not say 4 p.m. or targets. Maya glanced at the pie on the counter, then at the donuts and laughed about there being too many good things. She hugged her mother tightly. Eve hugged back. When the car reversed down the street, tail lights smeared red across the wet. Eve stood for a moment in the open door, the rain beading on her coat sleeve. Laundry could not be avoided. She gathered the basket and followed the narrow hallway to the back stairs that led down to the washer in the small utility room. The porch light flickered with a noise like a failing insect. Outside, rain banged on the tin awning and drummed a steady rhythm on the steps. Eve took the first tread carefully, then the second. On the third, her knee buckled with the treacherous speed of an old hinge. The basket lurched. She sat down hard, the jolt cracking through her like a struck bell. For a beat, she did not breathe. The laundry slid and fanned around her like a flag of surrender. Rain blew sideways under the awning and soaked the hem of her pants. She gripped her knee with both hands and waited for the lightning of pain to recede to a duller weather. Somewhere down the block, a baseball broadcast drifted from a neighbor's garage, the announcer drawing out each pitch, each pause. The words blurred into a soft, tinny wash, comforting in the way distant noise sometimes is, until it made her think of the clock at the clinic and the calendar she hadn't dared mark yet. "I can't do this," she whispered. It wasn't loud, but the confession slipped out with the same helpless honesty as breath meeting cold air. Tears arrived without drama and joined the rain as if they belonged to it. Thunder grumbled somewhere beyond the neighborhood. She lowered her head and let the porch's edge shield her from the worst of the weather. The porch light above hummed again and steadied, then hummed and flickered, casting her shadow long and shaky onto the wet steps. It looked like someone else's shape, bent where it shouldn't be, blurred where it used to be clear. She reached for the basket and pulled it closer, not to stand standing, could wait, but to anchor herself to a smaller task, a smaller corner of the evening. The baseball announcer's voice rose to name an inning, as if that mattered more than anything. Eve listened for another breath, then another, the way one does when trying to find the next step in the dark. On a crisp Saturday morning, the air over Maple Ridge smelled faintly of wood smoke and damp leaves. Inside Walt's Maple Diner, the windows fogged at the edges where warmth pressed against the November chill. Pastor Louisa Grant slid into the booth across from Eve, her silver hair tucked neatly behind her ears. She placed a steaming mug in front of her companion, the aroma of dark roast rising like incense. 40 years pouring coffee, Louisa said softly, her eyes kind but unflinching. I know heartbreak when I see it. Eve stared at the swirling surface of her cup, her hands wrapped around it as though to absorb steadiness. She had not spoken much about the clinic numbers, about the email from Tom, about the slip on the stairs. Words seemed to leak out in fragments, now deadlines, surgery insurance, hours cut. Pastor Louisa didn't interrupt, didn't rush. She simply listened, the quiet of her presence like a shawl drawn over Eve's shoulders. For the first time in days, sympathy warmed her more than the coffee itself. The bell over the diner door jingled. Walt shuffled out from behind the counter, box in hand, his apron dusted with flour. "On the house," he said, sliding the familiar pie toward her. "You need a little sweetness, Evelyn." His gruff voice carried good intentions. But something inside her shifted. She saw the box not as kindness, but as weight. Her fingers tightened. Standing abruptly, she carried it past the tables of murmuring patrons and pushed through the door. Outside the recycling bin waited by the curb. The lid clanged as she dropped the pie inside. A gasp escaped her throat, outrage, but aimed squarely at herself. She had spent years accepting what was given, swallowing what others thought she needed. No more. The morning sun had risen higher when she made her way to the county post office. The line curved past the bulletin board, filled with notices for rummage sales and church suppers. Boots squeaked on the tiled floor as people shifted impatiently. A man in front of her muttered about the wait. Another behind her sighed into his phone. Eve clutched the envelope in her hands, but her thoughts drifted toward November 20th, the circle tightening in her mind. At the counter, Lydia Chin, the reserved clerk, with precise gestures stamped her envelope, then slid a small calendar across the counter. A red circle marked the deadline 30 days away. Her gaze met Eve's with an intensity that startled her. "Don't waste them," Lydia said, voice quiet yet firm. Eve stepped outside, heart pounding. The wind carried a mix of diesel from the mail truck and the dry crunch of leaves underfoot. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the red cardinal timer, the prop that had sat silent for years. Its wings molded mid-flap seemed almost alive now. She turned the dial to 10 minutes. The ticking began faint but insistent, as if the bird's heart had resumed. One shaky step, then another, she began circling the parking lot. Shoppers glanced curiously as she traced her slow path past faded parking lines. Her knee ached. Her breath grew ragged, but she kept moving. Each click of the timer matched her pulse, a metronome of determination. When the timer buzzed, the sound was shrill in the open air. Eve stopped, chest heaving, lungs burning with effort, but something inside her had lifted. For 10 minutes, she had fought back against the numbers, against the weight of resignation. She had walked her way into a flicker of resolve. Back home, she took the calendar from her purse. The paper felt heavier than its weight. She taped it above her sink where every dish washed and every meal prepared would stare back at her. She lifted the red marker and circled November 20th in a ring so bold it looked like a noose tightening. The house settled around her, the tick of the refrigerator filling the silence. The cardinal timer sat on the counter, wings frozen mid-flap, ready to be wound again. By mid-November, frost glazed the sidewalks of Maple Ridge, each blade of grass sheathed in silver. In the church basement, the fluorescent lights hummed while a small circle of folding chairs was pushed against the walls to clear space for the community walk. The smell of brewed coffee lingered from the morning service. A volunteer with a clipboard raised her voice above the shuffle of sneakers. 420 meters, she called. Eve slowed to a stop, her chest heaving, face flushed. Sweat clung to her hairline despite the chill. Applause bubbled from the group encouragement, not pity, but the number itself struck like a bell. 420. Close, but not enough. She smiled weakly at Pastor Louisa, who touched her arm. "You're closer than you think," the older woman murmured. Hope flickered inside Eve, fragile as a candle flame caught in a draft. Back home, the calendar above her sink screamed in red ink. 5 days left. The circle around November 20th looked heavier each time she passed it. She slipped her hand into her pocket and felt the weight of the red cardinal timer, its steady ticking like a bird desperate to fly. That Saturday, instead of turning toward Walt's Diner, she walked down to the farmer's market that sprawled across the town square. Stalls lined with gourds, apples, and jars of honey stood under canvas tarps. Vendors bundled in heavy coats called out greetings. Steam rose from cider kettles carrying cinnamon into the cold air. One farmer, his gloves frayed at the fingertips, handed her a bag of Honeycrisp apples. "Stay warm, ma'am," he said with a nod. She returned the smile, a small but genuine victory, proof she could bypass old habits and choose differently. By afternoon, the sky had darkened. Snow began as a whisper, small flakes brushing her coat sleeve. Eve drew her scarf tighter, set the cardinal timer to 20 minutes, and placed it carefully in her pocket. The click of its dial steadied her nerves. She started around the block step by aching step. The houses wore crowns of frost. Porch lights flickered to life early against the gray. Her breath fogged with each exhale, clouds that dissolved before her eyes. The snow thickened, sticking to her scarf, her lashes, the creases of her gloves. She focused on the rhythm: step, breath, tick. The sound of the timer seemed louder than the traffic on Main Street. Neighbors glanced from windows as she passed, a few waving half-heartedly, others too absorbed in their own warmth. Eve pressed forward her knee, screaming, her chest hot and cold all at once. The bag of apples thumped gently against her hip with each step, a reminder of the choice she had made. When the timer buzzed at last, the sound pierced through the muffled snowfall. She slowed, staggered to the church steps, and lowered herself onto a wooden bench. Her lungs burned. Tears stung her eyes, mixing with the wet of snowflakes. She measured the distance in her mind: 440 meters. Closer, closer still, but still short. So close. She whispered, her voice thin against the snow-filled air. Her breath hung like smoke and disappeared. The bench's cold wood seeped through her coat, chilling her bones. Then a hand rested gently on her shoulder. Startled, she turned. Lydia, the quiet clerk from the post office, stood above her coat, buttoned, snow dusting her hair. Her calm voice broke through the swirl of despair. "Maybe it's time you know who I really am." The words hung between them, heavier than the storm, promising a truth Eve had not expected to hear. "Eve," Lydia said firmly, her breath rising in pale clouds against the cold church steps, "I coordinate senior steps at the county hospital. We don't have to wait. We can test you again today." For a moment, Eve thought the snow had muffled the words into nonsense. Lydia, the quiet clerk who slid calendars across the post office counter, was also a hospital board member, a coordinator for the very program, holding her future in its fist. Her lips parted, but nothing came. Back home, the red calendar squares screamed from above the sink. November 20th. Hours left. The circle around the date had grown into a wound she couldn't look at for long, and yet Lydia's calm eyes carried certainty. "I've seen people give up too soon," she added gently. "You're not one of them." The church basement was transformed by quick hands. Folding chairs were pushed aside into uneven rows. A set of bright orange cones marked a loop. A clipboard rested on a metal chair pin clipped tight. From the corner, a coffee urn hissed and filled the room with the smell of roasted beans like fuel for tired spirits. On a folding table near the start line sat the cardinal timer, wound and ticking steadily. Its plastic wings caught the light as though eager to lift. Pastor Louisa pressed her warm hand over Eve's. "You're not alone in this walk." Her voice carried the steady cadence of someone who had buried grief, baptized joy, and poured thousands of cups of coffee without losing hope. The door creaked open, and Walt entered, carrying a small cup layered with melon grapes and pineapple. "On the house, sweetheart." For after he said, setting it on the table with a wink, "No pie this time, just something lighter, fresher, chosen with thought." A young physical therapist technician, clipboard in hand, adjusted the cones and spoke briskly. "You'll walk for 6 minutes. I'll call out the distance. Blood pressure and glucose after." "Ready," Eve nodded, though her legs trembled. She could feel the eyes of her community on her, the ones who had seen her stumble and rise again. The timer ticked. The test began. Her shoes scuffed the linoleum as she rounded the first cone. Step, breathe, step, breathe. Each circuit around the basement felt endless yet familiar, the echoes of her own persistence. At 2 minutes, sweat beaded on her forehead. At 3, her breath rasped chest tight. Pastor Louisa's hand clapped softly in rhythm, steady as a hymn. Walt whispered, "That's it, Evelyn. Keep steady. 4 minutes." The technician's shoes squeaked as he paced alongside. "You're at 320 meters." Her knee flared, but she pressed on, eyes fixed on the cardinal timer. The wings looked almost alive. Tick, tick. 5 minutes. The room blurred, but Lydia's calm gaze anchored her. "Don't stop now," Lydia urged. "This is your life you're walking toward." At 6 minutes, the technician raised his voice, filling the whole basement. 462 meters. The number echoed off the cinder block walls. Eve gasped, stumbled to a stop, and tears cut clean tracks down her face. She had done it. More than required. More than she'd believed her body could give. The technician eased her into a chair, cuffing her arm. Blood pressure 132/84. Solid. He pricked her finger. The tiny machine blinked, A1C 6.9. Eve pressed her hand to her chest. "Not pain release." The technician scrawled his name across the official form, then signed with a firm stroke. "Your surgery is secured." The paper slid into Eve's hands like a ticket to a new life. She clutched it, tears blurring the ink. The weight that had pressed down for weeks lifted, replaced by something fragile and steady: relief. She looked around the folding chairs, the steaming urn, the timer still ticking. She looked at Lydia, whose secret had become salvation. At Walt, offering a fruit cup instead of pie. At Pastor Louisa, her presence steady as ever. Her world had not grown smaller under the deadline. It had grown larger, filled with allies she had not expected, with hope that felt earned. Early December, the first Sunday of Advent, settled gently over Maple Ridge. Eve eased onto her porch swing, the wood creaking in a familiar way, coffee mug warm between her hands. The steam curled upward, carrying the scent of roasted beans into the crisp winter air. She let herself breathe slowly in rhythm with the swing's sway, as though the whole world had finally decided to move at her pace. The ground beneath her felt steady, no longer tilting under deadlines and dread. The porch light glowed against the fading dusk, casting a halo that pushed back the dark. Neighbors passed on the sidewalk, bundled in scarves and wool hats. They lifted their hands and she waved back. "Stay warm," one called, and this time the words rang with genuine affection, not just small talk. She answered with a smile that reached her eyes. Inside the calendar, above her sink, still bore the bold red circle around November 20th, but it no longer screamed. It had become a reminder of what was behind her, not what loomed ahead. On the counter sat the cardinal timer, its wings still spread in mid-flap. It chimed softly now, not for exercise, but to call her family to supper. Its tick was no longer an accusation. It was a companion. Maya arrived just as the sky deepened to blue, her little girl skipping beside her with a backpack bouncing on her shoulders. "Mom," Maya said, cheeks rosy from the cold, "let's have dinner together. I'll handle the dishes this time." The words, simple as they were, carried the weight of change. For once, no extra demands, no thoughtless gestures wrapped in sugar. Just presence. Eve opened the mailbox on her way back inside. Amid utility envelopes sat a letter with handwriting she knew instantly. Pastor Louisa's looping script spelled her name. She tore it open carefully, smiling at the short note inside. "See you Sunday." Not a sermon, not a lecture, a promise. In the kitchen, the table was set with leftovers from the community potluck. A small turkey breast, carved and reheated mashed potatoes, folded with butter cranberry sauce, glistening in a chipped bowl. Thanksgiving lingered in every bite, the flavor of gratitude made tangible. Maya placed napkins beside each plate. Her daughter folded one into a triangle with concentration. The house smelled of sage and roasted meat, grounding the moment in something homely and distinctly American. They ate with quiet ease, conversation drifting from school projects to the neighbor's new puppy. Eve caught herself laughing, the sound bright and surprising. When her granddaughter leaned against her arm, Eve felt her heart settle into a rhythm as dependable as the swing on the porch. Later, she stepped outside again, pulling her coat tighter as the cold nipped her cheeks. The porch light hummed overhead, steady now, casting her shadow long across the frosted steps. A flag on the neighbor's porch rippled gently in the evening breeze. From down the street, church bells tolled the hour, their echoes rolling across Maple Ridge like an embrace. Eve closed her eyes, listening. The sound wasn't a summons or a warning. It was reassurance and anchor to a life reclaimed. For the first time in years, she felt lighter than regret, as though the weight she carried had been traded for something finer: dignity, community, and hope. The swing rocked gently as she sat again, mug cradled in her palms, steam rising into the cold night. The voice that might have narrated her journey, warm and steady, seemed to settle around her. Sometimes the heaviest weight is regret, and sometimes the lightest step is the one that frees you. The porch light glowed steady against the early winter dusk, and the little red cardinal timer now sat quietly on the kitchen shelf, no longer a threat, but a gentle reminder of time well used. Eve's breath rose in soft clouds as she rocked on the swing, the chipped mug in her hand, warm and forgiving. Some journeys don't close with celebration, but with an exhale when a weight is finally set down and dignity is picked back up. Even late in life, patience and small kindness can weave broken days into something whole again. Has life ever offered you a quiet second chance? If a simple kindness once changed your path, share it below. And if you'd like more stories like this, feel free to subscribe and stay a while.